Chapter 4: Audience and Self-Awareness. Two of the key issues regarding effective presentations include the ability to understand your audience and self-awareness. Before I go into detail, the biggest piece of practical advice I can give you here is to make sure you never alienate your audience. Always remember that within the context of a presentation, you are not the focus. They are. You work for them in that moment. You really do. The extent of your knowledge is not relevant. If you're successful, you'll get the credit you deserve. What you can give your audience matters, and that will make all the difference. This can be tricky because even if you're a polished speaker and you forget your audience, you'll fail. I guarantee this. For instance, what is the purpose of being an expert on something if your audience doesn't absorb the info you want them to? What is the point of trying to give advice to a room full of people that won't be able to use it? What is the purpose of being a marketing maven if you wind up making your presentation pretty much all about yourself and no one in the audience takes away anything from your message? Self-awareness. Being self-aware means that you have a strong sense of your surroundings, what you can reasonably understand about your audience, and most importantly, what you can reasonably assume they know about you. To focus on the last point, your title isn't as important as you think when you're addressing an audience. Whether you're a CEO, director, head coach, politician, teacher, etc., your credibility is only as good as what people think of you. As you know, perception is reality. If you have good credibility, great. If you don't have good credibility, but also aren't self-aware of your situation, you'll most likely have a presentation or speech that fails. If you're suffering from low credibility, for whatever reason, you can still deliver a great presentation. Just be honest about things. You know the phrase, quote, the elephant in the room? So address the elephant. I find that if you're candid about what you think the audience thinks about you or a situation, your credibility immediately shoots up. You've addressed the audience's concern, and they can now relax a little bit and actually listen to what you have to say. Believe me when I tell you that I've seen the following so many times at the professional and industry level. A few years ago, I was excited to go to a presentation by a very well-known and respected person in my industry. Of course, I won't share her name, but know that she's a leader in the beauty industry. The presentation was meant to be about how she started her business empire, and the event was marketed as an entrepreneurship innovation talk. I hate to tell you how disappointed I was. All she did was talk about herself. 95% of her presentation was an autobiography in disguise. I got nothing out of the evening. I didn't learn. I wasn't inspired. I wasn't entertained. Nothing. Oh, wait. There was free pizza. Correction. I got a slice of pizza. My apologies. In most, if not all cases, when you do a presentation, make it about them, the audience, not you. Ask yourself this simple question. What can my audience get out of this? People not only love to talk about themselves, but also love to hear about themselves. We love attention. At one point, I worked for a prominent company, one that I still have great admiration for. I remember attending a presentation by a division president who came from the outside with a bit of cachet behind his name. He started the presentation by saying, quote, I'm going to talk about my favorite topic, me. I don't think he was joking. He was being serious. How do you think the audience reacted? Stone faces and silence. He then got a little awkward, but he probably deserved it. So make it about the audience, not you. Let me share a basic example of how you can tailor things to an audience to give you a sense. Let's say you're doing a presentation on how injected plastic products are manufactured. If you're sharing info to a specific audience, such as a class of technical students, you may say something like this from Wikipedia. Injection molding is a manufacturing process for producing parts by injecting molten material into a mold. Injection molding can be performed with a host of materials, often polymers. Material for the part is fed into a heated barrel, mixed using a helical shaped screw, and injected, forced into a mold cavity, where it cools and hardens to the configuration of the cavity. Now, let's say you're doing a presentation to a general audience about the same thing. You may want to try something like this. I have a background, by the way, in injection molding, so this is my own interpretation. So, ever wonder how the plastic parts that you use every day are made? Anything from a typical pen to your remote control, the dashboard in a car, etc., etc. Plastic starts its life as resin pellets, small little round balls. This resin is poured into a hopper where it gets very hot and semi-melted. From there, it oozes into what's called a mold, which is the shape of the actual product in two mirror image parts. As the hot resin squeezes into the mold closes with an intense amount of pressure, remains closed from anywhere from 5 seconds to a few minutes, depending on the size and shape of the product, and then releases. The product then immediately begins to cool and falls into an exit chute. And voila! There's the outer casing for your remote control. I think this is suitable for a general audience as an intro, and I think it makes the point in an easier way, and you get more out of it this way. Bullet point 1. I provided some context to bring it to life with some product examples that most of us are familiar with. Bullet point 2. I tried to simplify the process without using too much jargon. Bullet point 3. I tried to use some descriptive language instead to offer relatability, quote, oozes. I wouldn't use that term in my industry, but I think it works here. Bullet point 4. I mentioned that the mold stays closed for a certain amount of time, which is what we technically call, quote, cycle time. But I didn't use that term, no need to. Bullet point 5. I didn't offer many details, such as the types of resin available. There's so many types of resins, by the way, and I didn't get into colors, etc. Casual introductions. While there is a dedicated chapter on introductions and different intro techniques, I'd like to talk a little about casual introductions here. But remember that this is here in this chapter as it relates to the importance of your audience. What I mean by casual introductions is taking the opportunity to, quote, break the ice with your audience. It's the verbal equivalent of shaking hands. It's a pre-introduction. In other words, prior to jumping into your actual presentation and your actual introduction technique. Let me share with you a technique I borrowed from politicians on both sides of the aisle. It works more with audiences that you don't know. I first need to tell you two unofficial terms I came up with, quote, guaranteed and non-guaranteed audiences. Non-guaranteed audiences are audiences that don't have to be there, so you need to work hard not only to keep them, but to hook them from the start. Guaranteed audiences are your employees, whether you're a CEO, SVP, VP, or department head of some type. They can also be your cohorts in a classroom setting, etc. Guaranteed audiences are essentially audiences that will be there whether they want to or not, to put it simply. Non-guaranteed audiences are clearly harder. Here are some examples of where you may find non-guaranteed audiences. Sales presentations, fundraising meetings, union meetings, political stump speeches. One way to capture the attention of a non-guaranteed audience is to tell them what you think they want to hear, starting with your introduction. I realize that doesn't sound so good to everyone, but let me explain with a personal anecdote. About 2 years ago, I was asked to do a presentation on marketing/entrepreneurship to a group of veterans at an institution that I've been associated with for a very long time. It's a program that offers veterans an opportunity to go into business for themselves. The program doesn't have traditional grades or rigid attendance, and those in the program are not really considered students. So I knew that while my presentation was part of the overall program, The participants didn't necessarily have to be there the entire time. I've done hundreds of presentations, but admittedly, I stressed over this one beforehand. Not because of the content I was going to share, I knew my stuff, but because of how I felt I needed to start. I wanted to acknowledge their service in the armed forces while at the same time not coming off as disingenuous. I finally decided to muster up enough courage and introduce the presentation like this. Before we begin, I just want to quickly thank you all for your service and sacrifice. Judging from the warm smiles that I saw across the room of approximately 30 veterans, I knew it was a big hit. It takes some nerve to do, believe me, but this actually works. If you're a business person and you're rallying students around a cause that you're a big benefactor to, for example, you may want to say something like this. And I'll use New York University since that's one of my alma maters. Isn't it a great day to be a violet? In that case, you wait for an applause. And unless you're a very controversial figure, I don't see why you wouldn't get a big one. Remember, this technique is about praising them. If you're worried about not getting an applause, just ask for one and start applauding too, of course. Just slightly adjust and say this. Isn't it a great day to be a violet? Why don't you all give yourselves a round of applause? You deserve it. I have to seriously say I think this is so much better than talking about the weather, assuming the weather is nice. The president of a company once started a presentation talking about the weather for an entire 2 minutes. It was mid-September, and there was about 2 weeks of no rain and that slightly cooler but still nice September weather in the tri-state area. Seriously, 2 minutes is a long time to talk about the weather. I was honestly saying to myself, okay, dude, I get it. It's nice outside. Another thing you may want to try before getting into the actual introduction to your presentation is to compliment the audience on a basic level. Since I'm also an adjunct instructor, there have been times in my career where I spoke to incoming interns on behalf of the company I was working for. On those occasions, I used the following type of casual introduction. So great to meet you all. Thanks so much for coming in on a Friday morning in the middle of the summer. Don't worry, I won't talk too long and get in the way of your weekend plans. If you're concerned, no, this isn't an example of not being confident or being concerned with taking up their time. This is simply being a little political in a good way and starting the process of connecting with them. It also shows that, once again, you are self-aware. It works a little better than just rhetorically asking, how are you? I'm sure the incoming interns are excited about working in your company in the fall, but they are most likely 18 to 21 years old. And yes, in the middle of the summer, on a Friday, they probably have the beach or weekend plans on their minds. Remember that whether you're a CEO, a student, or anything in between, when you're giving a presentation, you're working for the audience. Don't necessarily assume. I'll keep this short and sweet. Let's say you're doing a presentation on an individual. Don't necessarily assume that everyone in the room knows your subject. If you can safely assume and you definitively know that they know, fine. But even with famous people, don't assume. I think it's hard to find anyone above the age of, say, 15 or so who doesn't know who Socrates was. But you should make a quick reference of some kind, especially if you're not certain that everyone knows your subject. Also, if you have a photo of Socrates on a slide, you should provide some reference to him. Most people don't know what Socrates looked like as a man. Remembering your audience means the who, what, and why, and they're intermingled. The who. For example, if you're a heart surgeon and doing a presentation on the latest techniques in heart transplant surgery, you'll adjust depending on whether you're speaking to a room of your peers, such as other heart surgeons at a conference, or speaking to a room of medical students. If it's to a group of medical students, you may need to provide some base info that you wouldn't need to provide to a group of heart surgeons. Connect the dots. Caution here, don't fall into a classic trap. As in the above scenario, there will be times when you'll need to provide some base info, not because the audience may not know it, they may, but because they may need to be presented with it in order to connect one thing to another. The heart surgeons already know how to connect things without you explicitly saying them. In this case, providing the base information to the medical students serves as reinforcement or reminder rather than, quote, teaching it to them. The what? Let's say you're an investment whiz and have made millions trading the market. It's important to you to help the layperson learn some of the techniques that made you successful. If you're doing a presentation to a group of middle class first time investors, you'll want to not only simplify the information, but also tone down your rhetoric. Rhetoric doesn't always have to be a bad thing. But if you're an investment whiz, let's face it, you've probably gained a wealth of experience, and with that comes a level of confidence and an air of being pretty sure of yourself. That style might be completely fine with your peers, but won't work at all that well with first time investors. They have no use for the bravado. They need the building blocks. Also, you want to ensure you're not intimidating them. The why. Your objective may not be as obvious to your audience as you may think. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPad in 2010 during one of his famous Apple keynotes, the audience had a good idea of what he was going to share. For months, there had been news and rumors in the tech world about Apple introducing a tablet. What Jobs decided to do was to start off by discussing the iPhone and Mac. You may think that was irrelevant for introducing a new tablet, but he chose to walk us through what the phone and the laptop did and didn't do as well, so he could set the stage for a third category device that would be better for certain tasks. Jobs keenly understood that his work on the iPad wasn't complete. He still needed to communicate the value proposition to the skeptics and walk us through why we should carry around a third device. Hindsight is always 20/20. In retrospect, that was a smart move in his presentation technique. If he started with the iPad and its functions, some members of the audience still wouldn't know why we needed it. The takeaway here is just because your audience may know the what, you still need to tell them the why. That's your job, not theirs.